Have you ever been blindsided by office politics, watching less competent colleagues rise while you remain overlooked? Have you ever found yourself wondering why your honesty and hard work weren't enough to protect you from those who play by different rules? Perhaps you've felt that strange discomfort when realizing the world rewards cunning over competence and strategy over sincerity. There is a type of suffering that comes from misreading reality, a persistent vulnerability that arises when you operate under noble illusions in a world that doesn't share your ideals. It emerges when you refuse to see humans as they are, clinging instead to how you wish them to be. Niccolo Machiavelli called this effectual truth versus imaginary truth. It is the gap between how we imagine the world works and how it actually operates. And this gap, once it opens, begins to swallow your potential, your security, and your ability to protect what matters to you, all because you've been playing a game whose actual rules you've refused to acknowledge. This video is not about becoming manipulative or abandoning your moral compass. It is about something deeper, recognizing when your idealistic understanding of human nature is creating blind spots that leave you vulnerable. It is about stopping and looking clear-eyed at the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. And believe me, this kind of naivety comes at a cost. In the form of betrayals you never saw coming, opportunities perpetually missed, and a deep, bewildering sense that you're playing a game where everyone else seems to know the rules but you. Here we will talk about this straightforwardly. We will confront these uncomfortable truths about power and human nature. We will understand what Machiavelli discovered about the relationship between virtue and effectiveness, appearance and reality, idealism and survival. This video is a mirror and perhaps a punch in the stomach. But if you are here, it's because at some level you already feel that your idealism alone is not enough to navigate this complex world. So take a deep breath, because today's journey may shake everything you thought you knew about human nature, power, and survival. From an early age, you were taught virtues. Be honest, work hard, treat others as you wish to be treated. You followed these principles because they seemed not just right, but effective. And occasionally, they are. People sometimes appreciate your integrity, your reliability, your fundamental decency. But behind this moral framework, a harsh reality begins to emerge. A discomfort that grows slowly. A realization that something essential about human nature is being ignored, misunderstood, or idealized beyond recognition. Machiavelli called this the effectual truth, the reality of how humans and power actually operate, as opposed to how philosophers and moralists claim they should operate. It is not a cynical indulgence or immoral philosophy. It is a profound psychological reality that affects every human interaction, whether we acknowledge it or not. The effectual truth emerges from Machiavelli's unflinching observation that humans are, by nature, ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous. While this sounds harsh, he wasn't suggesting this is all humans are, merely that these tendencies exist in everyone, including ourselves, and ignoring them is perilous. The problem begins when we operate as if everyone shares our highest ideals. You assume others will recognize and reward your merit, only to watch as they respond to displays of power instead. You believe transparency will win trust, only to see it exploited as weakness. You expect reciprocal loyalty, only to discover it evaporates when circumstances change. But the truth is that every time you ignore the realities of human nature, every time you choose the imaginary over the effectual truth, every time you act as if power dynamics don't apply to you, a small piece of your effectiveness is sacrificed. This continuous denial of political reality creates vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities accumulate. Over time, your ability to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your values begins to erode beneath an idealism that, while beautiful in theory, fails to account for how humans actually behave. There is a war happening inside you, and the battlefield is invisible. On one side is what Machiavelli called virtù, not moral virtue, but rather your capacity for decisive action, strategic thinking, and adaptability to changing circumstances. On the other side is fortuna, the unpredictable forces of chance, timing, and circumstances beyond your control. While you try to control outcomes through goodness alone, something deeper in reality remains unconvinced. And it does not communicate with moral platitudes. It sends concrete consequences: opportunities missed, power diminished, security compromised. You feel bewildered when your competence goes unrecognized, shocked when loyalty is not reciprocated, confused when the world rewards those who seem less deserving but more strategically minded. These experiences are just the beginning. They are the first signs that you've been operating with an incomplete understanding of human nature, one that emphasizes our capacity for good while turning a blind eye to our capacity for self-interest, deception, and the pursuit of power. Machiavelli observed that when we fail to understand these dual aspects of humanity, we don't just feel disappointed, we become ineffective. We lose our ability to achieve worthy goals, protect what matters, and sometimes even survive in competitive environments. This psychological dynamic generates a state of chronic vulnerability. You try to succeed through virtue alone, but something always undermines your efforts. You do everything right, but achieve suboptimal results. You follow all the moral precepts, but deep down, feel a growing sense of ineffectiveness and naivety. Each time you ignore the realities of power in favor of pure idealism, you compromise your ability to be effective in the world. And the cost of this does not appear all at once. It accumulates. It gradually diminishes your influence, your security, and sometimes even your ability to do good. It is an erosion of your potential impact. Not everyone relates to power in the same way. Machiavelli showed us that individuals approach the question of ethics versus effectiveness differently, and this shapes how they navigate the complex interplay of morality and necessity. Among the different orientations, there are two particular patterns that Machiavelli implicitly identified. The prince, who understands the necessity of appearing virtuous while maintaining the capacity for strategic action, and the moral man, who believes virtue alone is both necessary and sufficient. The moral man operates from principles first, regardless of consequences. For him, the means always justify the ends. He would rather fail with integrity than succeed through methods he considers questionable. His identity is built around consistency between his ideals and actions. The prince, conversely, understands that effectiveness sometimes requires flexibility. He recognizes that the ultimate moral good may sometimes require actions that, viewed in isolation, might appear less than ideal. He judges methods by their results rather than by their conformity to abstract principles. On the surface, the moral man appears admirable, principled, consistent, clean-handed. But inside, there may be a growing frustration, a sense that his virtue goes unrewarded or even exploited in a world that doesn't consistently honor the same values. The prince may appear calculating, strategic, adaptable, sometimes opaque. But his effectiveness in achieving meaningful goals and protecting what matters provides a different kind of integrity. The integrity of actually securing the outcomes that the moral man can only wish for. What unites these orientations is that both can emerge from good intentions. The moral man wishes to live with personal integrity. The prince wishes to be effective in a complex world. But their approaches to navigating that world differ fundamentally. And the most dangerous aspect is that the moral man often fails to recognize the prince in others, attributing to naivety what is actually strategy, seeing as hypocrisy what is actually adaptation. This blindness to others' true nature creates persistent vulnerability. But sooner or later, reality forces a reckoning. And this is where something remarkable can begin. The moral illusion does not remain comfortable forever. When its limitations become too costly, a deeper understanding begins to emerge. Machiavelli observed that successful leaders must be both lion and fox, the lion's strength and the fox's cunning together forming a complete capacity to navigate the realities of power. Those who rely only on the lion's virtue of strength find themselves caught in traps. Those who rely only on the fox's virtue of cunning eventually find themselves confronted by more powerful forces. This dual nature manifests in strange and challenging ways. You may find yourself respecting someone's effectiveness while questioning their methods. You might feel conflict between what you know works and what feels most aligned with your ideals. You may experience moments of clarity when you realize that doing good in the world sometimes requires more than just being good. These are not mere moral dilemmas. They are invitations to a more sophisticated understanding of ethical action in an imperfect world. Other signals come through concrete outcomes. Watching less capable but more politically savvy colleagues advance. Seeing your projects undermined not because they lack merit, but because you neglected to secure allies. Recognizing how those who understand power dynamics achieve more lasting good than those who merely have good intentions. And there are also the defensive patterns, what we might call naive protections, that temporarily preserve your self-image as purely virtuous. You attribute others' success to luck rather than strategy. You comfort yourself with moral superiority when outmaneuvered. You dismiss political awareness as mere manipulation rather than necessary skill. But ignoring these realities does not make them disappear. The more you resist acknowledging the dual nature required for effectiveness, the more your capacity to achieve meaningful goals diminishes. Reality will not conform to your ideal vision merely because that vision is noble. And if you refuse to develop both the lion's courage and the fox's discernment, the signals will only grow louder, even if that means repeated disappointments and lost opportunities. There comes a moment when the gap between your ideals and your effectiveness becomes too painful to ignore. You realize that no matter how virtuous your intentions, something essential about execution remains missing. The feeling of being perpetually outmaneuvered is no longer just an occasional frustration. It is a constant companion. The sense of playing by rules that others have long ago transcended becomes unbearable. And it is exactly at this breaking point that what we might call Machiavellian wisdom can begin. The capacity to maintain your core values while developing the strategic awareness needed to actually advance them in an imperfect world. This turning point often emerges from what Machiavelli recognized as the fundamental tension of human existence, the desire to be good versus the necessity of being effective. When we confront this tension directly, we are forced to develop a more sophisticated understanding of ethical action, one that considers consequences as well as intentions. Machiavelli's insight, forged in the political turbulence of Renaissance Florence, was radical. Virtue detached from effectiveness often leads to ruin, not just for oneself, but for the very values one wishes to uphold. And if this is true in politics, it applies equally to organizations, relationships, and personal advancement. This process is not about abandoning ethics. It is about developing a more sophisticated ethical framework, one that includes appearance management, understanding that how you are perceived determines your ability to achieve goals, strategic timing, recognizing when to act boldly versus cautiously, power awareness, acknowledging hierarchies and influence patterns that affect outcomes. This path is not simple. It requires confrontation with uncomfortable realities about human nature. It involves looking at everything that has been swept under the rug of idealism, the naive assumptions, the strategic blind spots, the effectiveness sacrificed on the altar of moral purity. Strategic effectiveness, Machiavelli taught, cannot be achieved through wishful thinking about human nature. It must be grounded in a clear-eyed assessment of people as they are, not as we wish them to be. It is unique to each situation and specific to each power dynamic. What works in one context may fail in another, and what succeeds today may backfire tomorrow if circumstances change. This path requires the courage to answer questions that idealists often avoid. How does power actually operate in this situation? What drives the key decision-makers here? What appearances must I maintain to achieve worthy goals? What strategic alliances will advance my position? At this point, you might be feeling something strange, a mix of recognition and resistance, because in some way, all of this makes sense. But it's also challenging to moral self-conceptions many of us hold dear. And it's precisely this discomfort that indicates something in you has started to move. The truth is that if you've made it this far, you are no longer the same as when you began. Because now you know. And when the truth enters, it doesn't leave quietly. You are not here merely to be virtuous in a vacuum. You didn't come into the world simply to maintain moral purity while abandoning effectiveness in a complex, sometimes harsh reality. You are here to achieve meaningful impact, and that requires understanding power dynamics as they are, not as you wish them to be. Freedom, as Machiavelli implicitly understood, is not just freedom from external constraint. It is also freedom from naive illusions about human nature, illusions that constrain your effectiveness more than any external obstacle could. And this discovery of strategic wisdom isn't found by abandoning morality. It's found by developing a more sophisticated morality, one that considers outcomes as well as intentions, that acknowledges the fox must sometimes work alongside the lion. This truth stands in stark contrast to simplistic moral frameworks. It suggests that doing good in the world requires not just good intentions, but strategic effectiveness. The ability to navigate power dynamics, manage perceptions, build alliances, and sometimes employ the indirect route to worthy goals. And this choice to develop strategic wisdom is a silent revolution that changes everything. It transforms moral naivety into ethical effectiveness. It converts perpetual vulnerability into strategic security. It changes the question from, "Am I being virtuous?" to, "How can I be effective while remaining true to my core values?" But this revolution doesn't happen all at once. It starts in stages, in small decisions, in conversations like this. So if this video moved you, if at any moment you felt it was speaking directly to your experience, I want you to comment below. Write what you are feeling right now. Share what touched you most deeply. Give voice to what is moving inside you. This space is also yours. And by writing, you not only share, you commit to your own journey toward strategic wisdom. And remember, this is just one step. There is a next video waiting for you. And it is important, perhaps even more than this one, because the path of Machiavellian insight once started cannot be interrupted. It can only be deepened. So keep going. Go back inside and be ready to go even deeper. The truth about power and human nature sets you free, but only when you choose to face it to the end. See you there.